When it comes to active shooter events, you've probably heard the phrase, good guy with a gun. But what is the role of armed citizens in neutralizing an active shooter or a threat? That's today's topic. Stick around. Welcome to the Active Shooter Incident Management Podcast. My name is Bill Godfrey, your podcast host. I am joined by three of our other esteemed instructors here at the National Center for Integrated Emergency Response. Bruce Scott back in the house, like myself on the fire and EMS side. Bruce, good to have you.
Thank you for letting me be here, Bill.
We got Ron Ottebacker on the law enforcement side. Ron, good to have you in.
Thanks for having me.
And the inimitable Billy Perry back in the house from the law enforcement side. Billy, good to see you as always.
Good to see you. My honor.
All right. So today's topic is talking about the role of armed citizens in neutralizing threats. And let's start with the basics. Now, there's obviously not a ton of data, and I would say that most of this is probably anecdotal from a handful of stories. How effective are armed citizens in neutralizing threats generally? Just your opinions, your thoughts.
Well, not even anecdotally, we've had several instances in Jacksonville that they have interceded and stopped things. And before we go further, I am a staunch constitutional rights guy. So if I say anything that seems counter to that, it's not. It's just I am a strong constitutional rights person, and I think the Second Amendment is just as valid as the First and the Fourth and the Fifth and whatever. But that said, I think that they can be very effective. I think they can also be problematic.
Okay. So I'm curious, going to come back to that one. Ron, what's your overall thought as we start?
I look at the state of Florida. We just passed the constitutional carry law, which I'm not against. Again, I'm like Billy. But there is no component that requires a certain level of training. So although they may have a weapon, they may have bought that weapon a year ago, and now they can carry it, but they've never shot that weapon. And now they're trying to intercede in a situation where, perhaps maybe required a little more training than they're capable of. And that's my fear. You don't know what level of training or what they're going to do once they engage someone. Have they decocked their weapon if it's got a decocking mechanism?
Right.
Have they cleared their weapon after they used it? What are other things aside from whoever they hit, good guy, bad guy, doesn't matter. Those are all things that you're going to have to broaden your perspective a little bit, and it's not just to focus on the good guy with a gun. So, Bruce, I know in our you and I in our personal lives may or may not often be armed. We've spent some time on ranges. What are your thoughts just from the citizen perspective about the obligation of self-training if you're going to put yourself in that position?
I believe that I am not qualified to take on an attacker. I've never been in a shoot, don't shoot situation. I haven't learned how to quickly reload or to put my line of sight right or, look the backdrop that I've heard Billy and Otter talk about, what's going on behind those. So I would feel uncomfortable, even more uncomfortable in that position. However, I think most of us would act, right?
Right.
I feel like I would be totally unprepared, if you will, but I think I would feel like I needed to engage, just my sense of duty. But I shoot my weapons 1, 2, 3 times a year, not always the same ones. Sometimes I just have to figure it out again at the range, right? So that would be a bad time for me to try to be figuring it out. So in answer to your question, do you have a certain level of responsibility by being somebody that carries a weapon? I think that's true. I think you should go through that training. I think you should go through those scenarios. And Otter, one of you may be able to answer. Does local law enforcement offer that kind of training to a civilian? The shoot, don't shoot, or any of that kind of training?
I think outside of something along the lines of a citizens academy, no, because they're so strapped for time and range space and everything else. I think they're trying to bring their own officers up to speed.
Right. So as a civilian, if I wanted to get that kind of training, where could I go?
That's a good question. I would probably say one of the trainers, because a lot of the tactical trainers open it up, like Ted Kennedy, Bill Rogers, open them up to citizenry. You can do that.
And you may check your local gun ranges. Some of them may provide more advanced training than other places.
I was going to say I worked at did some work with a range that offered some of that, and very much, Bruce, I agree with a lot of your sentiment and comments. I have done some of that training and done some of the drills. In the positions that we're in, we're afforded as fire EMS guys to be able to do a level of training that may not be available to ordinary citizens. But I still, I know I haven't had the level of training that the two of you guys had, and would still feel that sense of responsibility to engage. But I think my mind would be working overtime about trying to remember everything and make a good decision. Now, Billy, you said it's both good and it can be problematic. Can you expound upon that a little bit?
I could expound on this for hours. And
we're a 30-minute podcast.
I get it, brother. And I'm going to try to be judicious in my comments. But I'll tell you, I teach a class second Friday of every month. I'll be teaching in the morning. And I use the analogy. I've been in multiple gun encounters, armed encounters. I've had a bunch of horrific diving accidents. We were just talking, I had sepsis, had a bunch of stuff. I even went through a horrific divorce, and nothing has come as close to killing me as my peers with a firearm. My peers. Now,
we're talking about other law enforcement officers.
Other police officers. Inadvertently, I'm relatively certain.
Yeah, let's go with that.
But that's what we're going to go with. But that said, I think when you enter into an unknown and an unknown training realm, I think that can be also problematic. I think it can be amazing, and it can end it if the viewers want to Google the Dollar General shooting in Jacksonville. That's a perfect example. But I think it can be a problem also. And I'll give it to you. I work in a school, as we talk about, and I eat lunch with the teachers and the administrators every day. And we had just had a lockdown drill, and one of the teachers said, because a lot of the teachers want to carry, and that's a whole separate side topic. And one of the teachers, and I like him, he's a friend of mine, he said, I don't understand why I can't have my 9 in my desk, and when somebody comes in the door, I empty the whole clip, pet peeve, into the door. And I said, well, congratulations. You just gave reasons A through QQ why in that short little stint why you can't. And I think that falls into it, because there's so much more to it than just aligning the sights and pressing the trigger.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bailiwick besides just aligning the sights and pressing the trigger.
There's a lot of risk for a citizen to engage in this. And I'm not just talking on the legal front, though I think we ought to talk about some of the big picture stuff. I don't want to drill down too far into that. But there's one of the biggest risks I see is the potential to be mistaken by the first responding officers as being the attacker or a attacker.
You're only 1,000% right in that. And I say that because my team, as a private guard now at a school, everything is emblazoned with security, because when I was with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, I taught active shooter to hundreds of classes. And out of the hundreds of classes, we did the normal curriculum. And one of the scenarios is an off-duty officer. And of all the classes that I taught, the hundreds, one class did not shoot the off-duty officer. And we've done everything. We had them in Class A's, traffic vests, Class A's with a traffic vest, badge around the neck, even the FBI thing where they orbited over their head, everything, and they all got shot. And the reason being is because, and even law enforcement officers and all the law enforcement officers that are watching this know, discrimination is our challenge. And I drive that home with my team: face, whole body, hands, belt, waistline, immediate area, and demeanor.
All right, I'm going to slow you down because I want to make sure that we're clear what we're talking about. When you say discrimination, you're talking about target discrimination, but slow down and say that once again, of what are the things that a police officer is trained to look at to figure out, if in his target discrimination, whether it's a bad guy or a good guy?
Generally, it's 5 steps. We incorporate 6. I stole it from Jim Walters, one of our tactical commanders. Face, whole body, hands, belt waistline, immediate area, and demeanor. And the reason I look at face is because if you just go whole body, hands, belt waistline, immediate area, and demeanor, I may not see Bruce. And if I look at face, I can say, it's Bruce, and I'm done, and I can move on. And the reason we look at everything else, face, I don't know him, whole body, what am I, and the discrimination process, and I want to emphasize this, and this is something that's been lost in a lot of law enforcement circles. We're not looking for reasons to shoot. We're looking for reasons not to. Whole body, do I see badges, markings, something showing, hands, gun? Doesn't mean I just shoot, because we're talking about a good guy with a gun, and there are a lot of them. Just because they got a gun in their hand doesn't mean they're necessarily bad. Belt waistline, that's where badges are by the holster, or if they don't have anything in their hands, or they have a gun stuck in their belt. I mean, so it can go either way, And then the immediate area, is there something leaning against the wall, in the immediate area, or a gun down on a table? And their demeanor. There's a huge difference between, I'm so glad you're here, I need some help, and I'm glad you're here. And we have to weigh all that. And I don't know that everybody can do that truthfully. And in law enforcement, we struggle with it with a modicum of training. And I think citizenry, you're still, like Bruce and I were discussing earlier, you're still responsible for every shot.
Ron, what's your thoughts? What are some of the risks of armed citizen engaging?
Again, I go back to level of training, but that level of training is not only for the armed citizens, it's the level of training for law enforcement.
Right.
We get quite a bit more training, but the vast majority of law enforcement officers will go through their entire career and never discharge their weapon. So how do we know how they're going to react once they discharge their weapon? We don't. We hope the training kicks in. We hope everything that we provided to them for tools works out well, but we don't know. And the chances of an armed citizen having a more adverse reaction than a well-trained law enforcement officer is probably greater. It's probably, because we don't know. I think there's been amazing situation where citizens have intervened and taken care of the problem
and saved lives.
They did as well as any trained police officer 100%. Could have done. There are others where, it's kind of the spray and pray thing where you're hoping you may hit some. We don't know to what level. So that's the consideration we have to have. And how can we secure the scene or scenario as best we can once we arrive? Because even if they did an outstanding job, do we want that person running around with their weapon? Think about it when we get a law enforcement officer shot. What do? We want to take their weapon so while they're getting treated, they're not thinking they're still being attacked. So there's a lot of things that we may consider. And it's just expanded further because now we've got a citizen that intervened and we don't know. They may be retired military and they may have more training than any law enforcement officer in that agency has. We just don't know. Or they could be, Jimmy just got a gun and he was in the right place, right time.
So before we leave this, I want to visit with this one specific question. In your mind, is there a particular posture that an armed citizen could take after post-engagement, the post-shooting, so that when the law enforcement arrives, it's more likely that they're going to take that heartbeat and question whether this is the bad guy? In other words, is it keeping the gun in a sole position? Is it being on one knee? Is it a hand over the head? It's assuming that they've contacted a threat, the threat's down, but they don't know the condition of the threat, so they're potentially still guarding the threat with a gun. Is there a particular posture that you think might help tip the scales? I
teach my employees, and I would say to other people, I would say don't have it in your hands when they get there. I would say be unarmed when they get there. Whether you've secured it in a holster and you have your hands up, I'm Billy the citizen. I shot him. I took him down. My pistol's in my holster, whatever, or have it over on a table, have it somewhere else, and say that's my pistol over there. That's my firearm over there. I would recommend not having it in your hands, and you have a very non-threatening posture.
Ron, any thoughts?
I agree. The more when we're arriving at a shooting situation, our intensity is going to be escalated. Our determination to make it home that night is going to be escalated, and how we respond to the situation, how we respond to the perceived threat. It may not be a threat, but if we perceive it as a threat, we're going to respond differently. So I think the better chance we have, that's why when we teach active shooter, we tell everyone have their hands, don't have your phone in your hand, have your hands up, do everything they say, don't argue with anybody. It's the same thing here. The more you can show them that you're complying with every request they have, the better chance for you to come out okay.
Okay. So let me switch gears to this topic then. In a perfect world, if you could design a training program or a preparation program for armed citizens who were concerned enough about this to get some additional training, what would be included in that training in your mind? Ron, we'll throw out a couple items and we'll go from there.
First thing is firearm safety. Understanding how the firearm works, understanding how you can make it so, if you need to clear your weapon, how, the safety part of it is important, knowing that you don't laser anyone with your weapon. It's not pointed at someone.
Can you explain what you mean by when you say don't laser anyone?
It's bringing your barrel across someone else's position or body or anything like that. You just, if Billy were in front of me, my weapon should be off to the side and down, or even if it's still up, it should be off to the side where he's not threatened in case I have an unintentional discharge or anything like that. It's just a part of weapons discipline, but it all comes to safety. There's so many things of safety that, again, we go to these people just bought a gun from a gun store. No one's taught them anything about safety because there's no training requirement that went along with the law.
Billy?
Man, there's a lot. And piggybacking with Ron, I would also look, and I look for it every time I teach a class, I look at weapons manipulation. I look at how you handle it. Not just are you aware of the muzzle like Ron's talking about, but how you manipulate the weapon. Can you lock the slide to the rear? Can you do a magazine change? Can you clear a malfunction? Can you drive it? Can you, with a modicum of proficiency? I would do that. A lot of shooting discrimination, a lot of getting the weapon to bear. Like where are you carrying it? Are you carrying it in your pocket? Are you carrying it on the inside the waistband holster? Are you carrying it on the outside? Do you move your shirt? Are you wearing a Magnum PI shirt? What are you doing? And how you do it. Again, coupled with that, and believe it or not, it's important. It's very important. But down the list is marksmanship. And you have citizens. I can shoot this, I can shoot that, and I go to the range. I shoot my personal hunting rifles and whatnot, and I'm working up loads, and I see them shoot, and they can shoot pretty well once they're there in position, with no stress. And I think that's a complete game changer. And we're all trainers. And one of the things that we know that most people do not, all training is not good training. Good training is good training. And also, these are perishable skills. And when was the last time you did this? If you did this in the Reagan era, your training is outdated and it's gone. It's perished because it is perishable. And I think, you have to stay current. We're not professors. And one of the other things, we don't take a Hippocratic oath, but we should. And I think friendly fire isn't. And, one of the questions that I ask everybody that I deal with is, what's the percentage of shots that good guys shoot that miss? And the answer is 0, because every one of them hits something. And we're responsible for every one of them. There you go.
Good point. Bruce, I know so a couple challenges I've run into. So I'm actually a pretty good shot. when I do what Billy described earlier, I have a time to get set, to come to bear, and I can put in a really tight grouping at a good distance. And then I had a range instructor one time have me jog in place for a couple of minutes, which I really enjoyed, and then try to come to bear and shoot. And I was all over the damn place. I'm like, okay, lesson learned. The other challenge that I ran into is a lot of the ranges where I shoot at, they won't let you draw from the holster.
Correct.
Because they're afraid about you shooting your leg or somebody else, I guess, as you're drawing. I don't know.
They're not afraid of it. They know it'll happen.
Yeah, as a safety rule. Bruce, what are your thoughts on that? What have you run into?
I agree with you 100%, but I can tell you, if you're going to take on, we talked about this good guy carrying a gun, right? And that's going to happen, especially where we live. Somebody in that is carrying a weapon, right? Take the time to get the training, right, to do it right, but also include, even if you are the good guy and you take the bad guy down. All right, so you've stopped the killing. You still got to stop the dying piece of this that we teach, right? Do you know how to do direct threat care? Do you know how to do tourniquets? Do you know how to do direct pressure, recovery position? So if you're going to take the time to learn how you act during an active shooter situation, take the time to look at how you're going to take care of the folks that are injured as well, and take that as just as important, right? In my opinion. So I think that's, to me, is one of the most hugely important things is, I tell my wife all the time, we'll go into a store and I'm like, all right, something happens. What's the way out? Right. And 99% of the people you talk to think the way out is the way you came in. And so I've tried to convey to her that that's not necessarily the case. Right. So watch for those lighted exit signs. Is there something closer that you can get out of the building? I don't know that I answered your question directly, Bill, but I think that is from a training perspective, if you're going to take the time and do the training to use your firearm safely, to actually help eliminate that threat, then take the time and to learn how to do at least direct threat care, stop the bleed, if you will.
Yeah. And I look, this is going to be a sensitive and polarizing topic. I know, and that's okay.
That's okay.
What we're saying is, if you care enough about this to be the person that's in a position to make a difference and save lives, then care enough about it to get a little bit of extra training to better equip yourself to be that person that's in that position to save lives. It's not a ton of investment, and a little bit of training can go a long way. Maintaining your basic skills,
Agreed.
doing some of these other things, paying attention to what you're doing, knowing how to provide the basic medical care for controlling the bleeding after, knowing how to not get shot when the cops show up because they've mistaken you as the bad guy, and now you've become part of the problem instead of part of the solution, and potentially lost your life. If, on the other hand, you're a cowboy that wants to yell yee-haw, then there's not a lot that we can tell you that's going to do any damn good at
Correct.
all.
And explaining to
is.
people what your responsibilities are. My first officer-involved shooting, it went well. Had a patrol commander across the street, have TAC commander right next to me. But I was counseled because as soon as we shot the guy and secured him, then I went to work on him because I was a paramedic at the time, and I was obligated by law, not only morally obligated, but I was obligated by law to work on him. They said, well, you worked on him too soon. I said, no, I didn't. We secured him. We secured the weapons. Then I started working on him, and he made it to the hospital, did fine. But again, having them understand that's your priority. We go back to the safety priorities. Now was he a bad guy just a minute? Yeah, he was, but that's over. So now we're doing what we're required to do. And being prepared to do that is a second thing.
And which leads me into something I wanted to mention, Bill. We talk about the NTOA's priority of life, right? And so if I get in there as a paramedic and I see this good guy that had a gun is now injured, and there's a weapon laying beside him, that moves him or her prioritization down, right?
If you don't know that
if
they
I
were
don't
a good
know,
guy
right,
with a gun,
right.
You're thinking they're a bad guy with a gun.
Exactly. So innocents and responders, and then bad guy, right? That's kind of order of work, right? So I may have moved them down in my priority list that they necessarily need to be or should be.
Because we didn't understand who they were.
Exactly.
And
That's
what
my
their-
fear.
What their role is.
That's a good one.
The other thing I do want to just touch on this, because you talked to, one of you mentioned this earlier, post-engagement. If you're a good guy with a gun and you get engaged in one of these things, law enforcement is going to secure your weapon. They're going to take your weapon from
100%.
you. It's not about confiscating it or
No.
any of that kind of stuff.
No.
And oh, by the way, this is exactly what happens to other police officers.
I was about to say, they take hours. It's
Exactly.
okay.
So I mean, I think Ron, you mentioned it. If you've been shot and you're injured, you can lose track mentally of what's
Right.
going on. So there's a safety reason that we would take your weapon away, but also from an investigative purpose, everything else. When there's a post-engagement with a law enforcement shooting, that law enforcement officer's gun, that gun that was involved in the shooting is secured.
Sure, 100% of the time.
And as a good guy with a gun, if you get engaged, you should expect
Right.
that law enforcement's going to secure
Right.
your weapon.
And it's temporary. You know, it's temporary if everything was fine. And they're gonna count the weapons. They're gonna count the rounds. They're gonna, account for all of them and how many of them were missing. And again, that's where, even though you're not a professional, that's where the professionalism of carrying a gun comes into play. And again, I'm as politically correct as a cactus, you know, I'm a huge constitutional rights person, and a lot of people do carry. I cannot remember the last trip I made to Publix where I did not see somebody imprinting, where I didn't see a gun on somebody in Publix. I can't remember the last. Would you agree?
Yeah, 100%.
And
Walmart too.
There you go. And I think if anybody that doesn't believe it, next time you're at Walmart or Publix
Or any
Look.
other big box,
any other big box
no,
store,
not to be mentioned, brand name store,
name.
so I don't get a cease and desist notice
Exactly.
from these
Sorry.
corporations, guys.
Sorry.
It's a positive. But you know, people are carrying, and I think that they do have that responsibility, and that's why from my people that work with and for me, I inspect their magazines. Everything has to be topped off, quality, hollow point ammunition. I won't say what we use. That's fully topped off because they do count the rounds. They do account for them all, knowing where they go, what they get, what they do. If you're going to carry, you need to know the ammo that you carry. You need to know why you carry the ammo that you carry. You need to know what size and weight grain, what the muzzle velocity is. You need to know that. It's written on the box so that when you're at, because it's a big deal. Even if you kill a really, really bad guy, it's still a homicide investigation, and it's a big deal, is it not?
Yes, sir.
So there you go.
I think my question would be, you said earlier they're responsible for every round.
Every round.
What's the ramification? You decide to be the cowboy and all of a sudden
Yeehaw.
and you hit an innocent person, right? That person, a civilian.
Right.
What should they be thinking about before they make that decision, right?
Well,
and so the time to think about it to me would be today.
Agreed. Agreed. And in Florida, statute 776 denotes what is justifiable use of force and what isn't. And I think that as a carrier, you need to know that backwards and forwards and know the times that you can and cannot shoot. And I think you'd be, if there's no malice, there's no intent, I think it'd be, the chances of you being criminally charged are going to be lessened. However, you are civilly liable for, and I don't bandy that word about loosely, because again, when people hit me with there's too much liability, I'm like, pull out your Google machine and find the last time somebody was successfully litigated for that. And you're going to find out that if you add them all up and carry the one, it's zero. But this one is true. This one does have liability. And I think if you shoot Ethel buying a gallon of skim milk when you're trying to shoot evil Ernest, I think you're going to have a civil problem.
It comes back to the negligence of the
Right.
situation too. If you were negligent in firing your weapon,
Correct.
and you've never trained on it, that's what
Right.
we go back to, and you hurt someone, then you can be criminally liable too.
I also want to point out that the context of these specific legal comments are coming from the point of view of the state of Florida, from a
Correct.
law
Right.
enforcement perspective. When you expand this very discussion across the country, I would. My gut tells me that in some places your chances of being criminally charged are much higher,
exponentially increased.
and so I don't think you can rule that out. But I think that's just part of the as a guy that carries. Mm-hmm. That's part of the decision that you make when you decide to carry, because you're saying, I have this with the potential of using it, and I have to accept the fact that I'm responsible for how it gets used.
And I'll one up that. I think that it's not just a decision to carry. I think it's a commitment.
That was my point earlier.
And I think when you make that commitment to do that, because you are now introducing a firearm into every situation that you're entering into. Because even if you have to go hands-on with somebody that's doing something inappropriate in front of you, you've now entered a firearm into that. And I think it's a commitment, and you have made a commitment to educate yourselves in the ability to handle that firearm and the knowledge of whatever state, like you said, because you're right. For Florida, it's 7.76. For other states, whatever it is, you have to be able to know that and know what the ramifications are,
and have that same commitment to retain your firearm.
100%.
Yeah,
that's my fear. It's been so long since I've even taken any kind of formal training. That's my fear. I haven't made that commitment, and I'm sure most of the concealed folks out there haven't either.
Agreed.
Yeah, it comes with an awesome responsibility. That level of commitment to be armed, whether you're a civilian or a police officer.
Right.
It comes with an awesome responsibility. Gentlemen, thank you very much for drilling down on this topic. And for those that are listening, we hope that you enjoyed it. If you have some questions or thoughtful comments, by all means, please shoot them our way. We're always happy to engage in serious conversation and serious context about these topics. The whole point of these podcasts is for people to learn and for training value and for things to get better and not get worse. And with that, Carla, thank you very much. Our producer, Carla Torres, for taking care of us as always. And until next time, stay safe.